Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zac Boam, and I'm a sales engineer with Imperva Italis Company. I wanted to welcome you to our multi-part video series on Imperva Cloud Web Application Firewall Basics. In this series, we're going to discuss topics such as how do I onboard an application into the WAF? Once I've onboarded my application, how do I create policy and custom rules and apply them to specific domains or entire accounts? How do I interpret security events when invariably they arise? And everything in between. I appreciate you joining me on this journey, and I thank you very much for your time. I want to welcome you back to our multi-part video series on Imperva Cloud Web Application Firewall Basics. Today's topic is a little more advanced and requires that you have created a user in the Imperva Cloud WAF console which can access API keys and IDs. So if you haven't done so already, I recommend you click the link in the description to access the video we made describing that process. But the topic for today's video is how do I onboard just the Apex domain of my application into the Imperva Cloud WAF console. Without further ado, let's jump in. Alrighty, everybody. What we're looking at here is the home page for the Imperva Cloud WAF console. A couple of prerequisites that you need to have accomplished before you can onboard your site via API into the Cloud WAF console is that you need to ensure your user has been set up with an API key and ID. Just to double check that, you can click on your user. In my case, I'm going to use this Zac Boam right here. And we will click Edit, and we'll take a look at his API keys. You can see that I have an API key with the following ID, and that I have an API key, which I should have saved when I created this. Now, I just want to make sure that this is set to enabled, which it should be. Once you've verified that your user has access to an API key and API ID, you can use any API client that you'd like and use the API key and ID as authorization headers, or Imperva provides a full suite of APIs that you can utilize, and you can actually execute API calls from our website. So, under the Website Management API definition, and we will include this link in the description, you will find the definition of the API for simplified site onboarding. When you've got your API key and ID, you can click Authorize. It will have options for you to put in your API ID and your API key, and then you can close out this menu. When you click on it again, you should see that those have been obfuscated and that it has effectively authenticated. Beyond that point, you want to put your My ID or your account ID under the CAID parameter. Now you can get that ID in the Cloud WAF console under the Account tab. You'll see this ID right here, 2371574. When we come back to our page here, here's my ID, so I've input that there. Then you'll need to fill out the request body for the application that you want to onboard to the WAF via the API. In this case, because we're onboarding just the Apex domain, I'm going to onboard zacsflyshop.com. Now I want to clarify that there's no www.zacsflyshop.com. That record does exist in my DNS, and we will get to that momentarily, but because we're trying to onboard just this domain name, we then need to also name it zacsflyshop.com. So whatever your domain name is, you want to onboard the naked domain here and have it match into both domain and name. There will be two dummy IPs listed here under the servers column. Now I'm going to leave it blank because I want Imperva to go query my DNS and find what IPs I have currently established for my servers. Now, if you want to be more specific, or if you only want to send traffic to Imperva on a specific IP, you can predefine that IP in this server parameter. You should make sure that the type is Cloud WAF, and then you should be able to click Execute. And this should execute the API call for you automatically. Now, it's going to take a minute to load, and you'll see the response data get loaded below here in a moment. What we're looking for is a 200 response code that indicates the API call has been executed successfully. So you can see the post body of the request that was sent, the header information that contains my API key and my API ID, the domain that I'm trying to add, and then I believe we're done here. Yeah, it looks like we've finished loading. We'll take a look at the response code, which was a code 200, which means it was successful. Now this is important data for you here because this is now requires your input into your DNS. So the API call has successfully added zacsflyshop.com to the Cloud WAF, but we are currently in site status as not configured. That's because we haven't created a certificate. I guess I should say we haven't validated the certificate yet. We also don't have any DNS that is pointing the traffic from my original DNS settings to the Imperva settings. So you'll notice here's my original server IP. So you should see the server IPs that were queried. I know that that's the right IP. Now what it's going to tell us is the validation method we're going to use for the certificate is CNAME validation, which is good. There's a lot of benefits to CNAME validation with Imperva. What we're going to need you to do is add the following record to your DNS provider. So I'm going to have to add the value for an A record of 107.154.75.70 to the host of zacsflyshop.com. I'm also going to have to do that a second time. Now typically that's only done in one A record. So once you've done that, there's another couple of DNS changes you need to make. You have to create a new record for this host name, _delegate_validation.zacsflyshop.com. Now in your case, it would just be your domain name, and you have to add this value to that record. Now this value should match the CNAME value that's listed above for the www.zacsflyshop.com. Now I know I said a minute ago that we're only onboarding the naked domain. So if you don't want to onboard www, don't panic, we're getting there. I will go ahead and I will see you again when I've made those DNS changes. Okay everybody, I just wanted to take a moment to show you what your DNS should look like if you're only trying to onboard your Apex domain. So you'll notice here that I have my domain names, my host names, in my hosted file for zacsflyshop.com. Now I'm using AWS Route 53, so keep in mind this may look a little different if you're using a different provider, but it's the same concept. For my naked domain, zacsflyshop.com, I have created an A record that contains both of the IPs that were listed in the response to that API call. I've also created the delegate _validation, zacsflyshop.com. It's a CNAME record, and it's got the same value that was listed in the response to the API call. What I haven't changed is the www.zacsflyshop. That is still an A record, and it is still pointing to my original server IP, which is exactly how it should be. Now, once we've made those changes, I'm just going to view the status here to make sure they've propagated, and it looks like they have propagated effectively throughout the Route 53 system. So I will come back to my Imperva Cloud WAF console, and I'll click on Application. If everything has gone the way it should so far, you should see your naked domain onboarded to the Imperva Cloud WAF console. Now, the biggest problem is this big red exclamation point that says not configured. So you'll go ahead and click on that, and you'll click Manage Domains. You can also get to the domains page by clicking on the website itself and scrolling down to the domains tab on the left side of the screen. Now you'll notice that we've got both www.zacsflyshop.com and zacsflyshop.com listed in the WAF here. And we're only trying to onboard zacsflyshop.com. Something to keep in mind, when you execute an API call to onboard a naked domain to the WAF, the documentation says that if a www record exists with an A record or a CNAME, Imperva will also onboard the www. The reverse is also true. If you have a valid A record or CNAME, I guess it's technically just an A record for your naked domain, then it will also onboard the naked domain. So if the records exist, both of them will be added. What we're going to do first is we're just going to delete this record right here for www.zacsflyshop.com. It's going to say all network traffic for this domain will be blocked. Are you sure? Don't panic about this because you haven't made any changes to your public DNS. So all you're doing right now is deleting the www.zacsflyshop.com domain out of the Imperva console. So we'll go ahead and delete that. And you'll notice it says domain deleted successfully. We've only got the one domain here now. Problem is it's still set as status not configured. So we'll take a look at what the issue is here. It says that there's no DNS traffic. Well, we already changed the DNS, so if you still show this issue, make sure that your TTLs are set to a reasonable amount of time and wait that amount of time so you don't run into any cache issues, and then click Check Status. When you've clicked Check Status, Imperva will go re-query the DNS to see if those records exist, the two A records that we put in. In this case, everything was successful. We've changed the status from not configured to configured, and there's no issues. Now, you should notice on the Application tab that you have successfully onboarded your naked domain, in my case, zacsflyshop.com, and it has a fully configured status. A couple of things to bear in mind. Number one, you can test this locally. If the issue that you have is that there's no DNS traffic being detected, you can test it locally by using the IP addresses that were delivered in the API response, spoofing your local host file, and then directing traffic through a web browser directly to that domain. Because your browser will search through the local host file first for a resolvable IP address, you'll be resolved to the Imperva IP address. and you should be able to see the Imperva certificate. Now, if you went ahead and made the domain or the DNS changes already, you can also launch an incognito window. I would type in everything exactly as you want it to be. So in my case, it's HTTPS, because I want to show the certificate, //zacsflyshop.com. Now, this is my site. It's very fancy. Thank you very much. But I'm going to go ahead and check the certificate. In my case, the certificate is showing as being assigned from Global Sign Atlas, which is the certificate authority that Imperva uses to provide certificates for our customer. Part of the original API call was generating an Imperva certificate on your behalf, and it's automatically validated when you create that delegate _ validation record in the DNS. So everything is looking copacetic here, which means that my site as the naked domain has been onboarded completely successfully. If, for kicks and giggles, you want to make sure that you have your www domain still pointed to the original IP address, you can type in your www domain name. So I've gone ahead and done that. I'm just going to double click in here, make sure it didn't prepend anything. And then I will click on the certificate here, check the certificate. And in my case, I get a Let's Encrypt certificate, which is a certificate that lives on my server. So that certificate is exactly what should be presented if the traffic is not flowing through Imperva. With that being said, that brings us to a close on how to onboard your naked domain to Imperva without onboarding your www domain. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our partners at Network Consulting Services Incorporated. Thank you very much.